Network. And today's topic is knowing we're alive. And I've encountered a very interesting phenomenon among um, not a minor number of people, and that is that we can fall into a pattern of relishing our suffering and finding sweetness in the suffering and pain that we experience in life. And the question is why? Why is that suffering so sweet? And what I've recognized and clients have validated is that that suffering lets us know that we're alive. And so feeling pain is a feeling, and at least that gives us an experience of life and vitality, which might seem very contradictory, but it's a really interesting phenomenon, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you joining us this morning, and welcome to everyone else who's with us. Before we get started on today's topic, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through the nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, knowing we're alive. And I think what can so readily happen is that we get very dissociated from our emotions, from our bodies. We get disconnected, and disconnected not only from ourselves, but from our environment, feeling this isolation from others. And one of the ways that we can feel is through pain. And some people do that through extremes of cutting, for example. And others of us do approach the pain or create the pain through emotional rumination, but it's familiar, right? So if we have been schooled in trauma and painful emotions, as painful and uncomfortable as they may be, the irony is that they're familiar, and in that familiarity, they hold some comfort. They can provide some comfort, and they allow us to feel. And this pattern of pain becomes somewhat, well, it becomes a pattern. It becomes habituated. It becomes a habit, and it becomes a chemistry that is very familiar. And because that chemistry is familiar, when we need comfort, it's ironic that we would seek comfort through discomfort, right? But when we need comfort on a certain level, we then seek to recreate that pain. We create reasons for our suffering so that we can experience that familiar pattern. And I wonder, it's maybe an uncomfortable thing to look at in ourselves, but I wonder if, as we do some self-examination, a pattern like this makes itself present, brings itself to awareness. If we can allow ourselves to notice what are the kinds of things that we do that are habituated, that somehow cause us discomfort, but we persist in those things, in that pattern. I think the thing about patterns is that so many of them are beyond our conscious awareness, like the motivations for those patterns. For instance, smoking or overeating, compulsive eating, for example. That was something that I experienced for a number of years. I would eat to get comfort, and then I would berate myself for having done that. So there was a pattern of initially self-soothing that then turned into kind of self-abuse. And we can do that in all different levels. People who smoke, who want to quit smoking, and they find themselves smoking and then being angry at themselves for smoking, and it's a spiral, a downward spiral. And yet there's something familiar. There's something that is a pattern wanting to be fed. I think that we can have emotional addictions in the same way that we have other physical addictions. Because when we think about it, emotions create a set of chemistry. And we become acclimated to that chemistry, perhaps addicted to it. So, for instance, if we've grown up in an environment with lots of upheaval and lots of drama and lots of emotional strife, there's a lot of chemistry that goes along with that. Good morning, Dido. So good to have you here with us this morning. And what happens is that we have this chemical makeup, or this chemical proclivity, that when things are going well, and we talk about self-sabotage, when things are going well, we look for a way, because it's very unfamiliar, look for a way to recreate that familiar chemistry that even though it's uncomfortable, gives us some sense of comfort. And so we'll create drama, or we'll derail what's going on because it's threatening a status quo of some sort. It's threatening an existing pattern. And that threat drives us to try and create something familiar to grasp onto. So I wonder if you've noticed, as things are going well in life, if they haven't historically, if things going well is unfamiliar, I wonder if you notice a pattern of creating some kind of drama to derail whatever that progress was, whatever that potentiality was. I think we've all done it at one time or another. And we can cultivate our awareness to a place where we can notice this happening before we go deep down that path. And when we notice, oh my gosh, we don't have to berate ourselves about it. We can just notice it and say, oh, wow, check that out. How wild is it that here I am, things are going great, and all of a sudden, bam, something happens. And oftentimes it's something that happens that looks like it's completely outside of our control. And that begs another story. If something happens that looks like it's completely outside our control, is it? That can take us into the realm of the metaphysical in a way, or at least that's probably what we would call it. But maybe, and we talk about this with law of attraction, we become a magnet for certain experiences. We are vibrating like a frequency, not like a frequency, with a frequency, just like a radio station that is tuned to certain other frequencies of events, of circumstance. And we then magnetize those circumstances. And it's kind of agnostic. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to magnetize bad experiences, or I'm going to magnetize just good experiences. It's the frequency magnetizes similar frequency. So when we shift into our let's call it negative patterning or painful patterning, it may be that we then attract experiences that give us that hit, that pain that we are so familiar with, that we're acclimated to. And so what does it take to shift out of that? It actually takes practice. I've spoken before about a program that I had encountered called DNRS, Dynamic Neuro Retraining System. And the website is retrainingthebrain.com, I believe. Anyway, it's talking about repatterning the limbic system. The limbic system is our fight or flight system. And what happens is it becomes overstimulated. And it's there to protect us. But when it's overstimulated, it goes on overdrive and it starts protecting us from everything, or from more and more. And that's where our system gets overloaded. And so to retrain the limbic system, what we look to do is to practice different heightened positive emotional states, because these patterns of emotion and these patterns of chemistry and frequency are not our familiar patterns. And so when we learn something new, typically it takes practice. There is such a thing as a one-time learning experience, but typically, certainly breaking habits, well, typically takes practice. And so in retraining our body and being by practicing elevated emotional states, by giving our bodies a jolt of that chemistry on a regular basis, we're stirring things up and we're creating new neural pathways and new chemical pathways as well. And in that stirring things up, what is likely, we talked about chaos a little while ago, what is likely is that the old patterns are going to want to reassert themselves because that's a familiar pain. And that chemistry set is entrenched. And so there's this period of push me, pull you kind of chaos as our system is recalibrating to different patterns. And it happens. And again, rather than judging ourselves, what we can do is allow ourselves to be curious and compassionate, to really be observers that in a way that maybe we can even bring some sense of awe to the process, because it's rather wonderful. It's rather awful, full of awe, and can be really challenging to be moving through that chaos, not knowing what's up, what's down. Am I crazy because things are getting disoriented and uprooted and disrupted, and it's unfamiliar, so we don't know the path forward necessarily, because we're in a construction zone and it can be pretty dusty and dirty and messy and even a little perilous moving through a construction zone. You need to pay attention and step with deliberation, deliberate intention, so that you don't trip and fall on stuff that's strewn about in a construction zone. So I think that one of the gifts that we can give ourselves is to have some kind of button or something that just, not necessarily literal one, but figuratively, that says work in progress and construction zone sort of thing, because if we allow ourselves to really be engaging with life, we are a work in progress. And we don't have to just have the experience of being alive be one that's coming from sorrow and pain and trauma. Sometimes we cling to that because that's where the juice is, right? That's where the intensity of life is. But the reason that the intensity of life is there is because of our history. And we can create an intensity of awe and wonder and maybe even joy. I can say that for most of my life, joy wasn't on my radar at all. It was not a priority. It was irrelevant. It wasn't even part of the conversation, because I was very, very steeped in suffering. And I can say that we get to elevate our baseline. So we may not go from depression and sorrow and grief to elation, but we can raise the baseline in a way that our chemistry can evolve to a more joyful place, less painful place, less drama, less conflict. Maybe, we've grown up with trauma, drama, and conflict. So we can practice moving out of that. And we can practice consciously choosing differently. And when drama presents itself, we can look and maybe interact with it differently, not getting sucked into the vortex of trauma, or drama. Works both ways there. So hi, Sue, welcome. Wow, we've got a party here this morning. It's so good to be here with you ladies and everybody else, but these are ladies that I know and love. It's wonderful to be sharing together this morning. So giving ourselves the gift of stepping into our own power to choose. Remember, we're creating stories all the time. We are generating the narrative of our lives. It may have been given to us initially. We may have adopted it without even realizing it. But there's a point at which we can step back and say, oh, what is that narrative? What is that story? And do I choose that? Is it from me? Is that my story? Or is that the story that I inherited? Is that the story of my family? Is that the story of my culture? Is that actually my story? And to look at that and to have a willingness to entertain, at the very least, start entertaining the possibility that we can write our own story about ourselves, about life, about the world, that we don't have to receive and live into the story of generations and generations that have suffered and struggled, that we can actually start creating a story of the lives we want to live, of being a way we choose to be, rather than a way that we have been programmed to be. Rosalind says, breaking the mold. Exactly. We have the ability, particularly when we see it. Can't really break it until you see it, until you recognize it, until you bring it into conscious awareness. But once we do bring ourselves conscious to these narratives and these patterns of pain, patterns of struggle, and start to question them, that's the beginning of the opening to freedom. And so that's today's invitation, is notice, what are the patterns? Are there patterns of pain? Are there patterns of sorrow? Are we cherishing and relishing and steeping ourselves in painful emotions because they're familiar? And if so, what would it be to choose differently? What would it be if we were to entertain the possibility of making different choices, like actually choosing rather than inheriting and perpetuating? So, breaking the mold. That would have been a great name for today's conversation. Thank you for that, Rosalind. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning on Enlightened World Network's Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. And the links are in the description. And as always, I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to have these conversations and to engage in these musings about what it is to be human. So until next time, so much love to you.